Hello and good evening, everyone. I'm Archit Seshadri. Thanks so much for joining us. You are watching Gravitas, where we deconstruct the day's top headlines and bring you a global perspective. Tonight, the big discussion revolves around U.S. President Donald Trump taking yet another rollback, this time impacting the transgender community. How will this latest rollback play out? Will Trump review this decision? To get perspective on this story, we are joined by Lina Rojas from Colombia. She likes to talk and write about issues concerning the LGBT community. We also have Anand Ahuja, an attorney from New York, as well as WION's correspondent Giles Gibson joining us from Washington, D.C. Getting us all of the latest perspective. We will get to our guests in just a moment, but first, some background perspective. On Wednesday, Trump's administration rolled back federal guidelines by the Obama administration that allow transgender students the right to use public school bathrooms that match with their gender identity. Let's get more on that report first.
In May last year, President Barack Obama had instructed public schools to allow transgender students to use the bathrooms matching their chosen gender identity, with the veiled threat of withholding federal funding if they forced transgender children to use bathrooms against their will. Back then, the directive met with strong opposition, and 11 states, including Texas, Georgia, Alabama, Wisconsin, West Virginia, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Utah, Maine, and Arizona, decided to sue the Obama administration on the issue. The lawsuit accused the Obama administration of running roughshod over common-sense policies that protect children. It asked a judge to declare the directive unlawful. Now, Trump, in a two-page directive, has said that the earlier directive needed to be withdrawn because it lacked extensive legal analysis, did not go through a public vetting process, sowed confusion, and drew legal challenges. Trump's move has met with protests from transgender activists.
Trans equality now! Trans equality now! Trans equality now!
The worst case scenario is what is already happening. Children all over the country are scared by this man. They are really worried that they're going to go to school tomorrow and be bullied. These are kids who have to go to school all the time worried about being bullied by other kids, being bullied sometimes even by educators. And now they have to worry about the Attorney General of the United States and the President of the United States bullying them. It's just not okay.
For Trump, this move is a reversal of his earlier stance. The White House previously boasted of Trump's support for LGBT rights, noting in a Jan 31st statement that he was the first Republican presidential nominee to mention the community in his nomination acceptance speech. With Bureau Inputs, Shilpika for WION.
All right, let's now go straight to our correspondent, Giles Gibson, joining us from Washington, D.C. Giles, thanks so much for joining us. First of all, a lot of opposition with regards to this when it was introduced last year by the Obama administration. Is Trump taking into account that kind of opposition? What's the mood like in the United States with regards, especially for the transgender community?
That's right, Archie. Last night we saw protesters outside the White House protesting against the decision to pull back on these guidelines that were issued under the former President Barack Obama. And they'll criticize those protesters. They'll criticize Donald Trump and the Republican Party for pulling back these guidelines, saying that they're hitting out at the LGBT community here in the US. But if you speak to Trump supporters and Republican Party members, they would say that this isn't necessarily about hitting out at the LGBT community. It's about how these sort of civil rights issues are organized. The Democrats traditionally would say that civil rights issues are the subject of the federal government, but Republicans say that this sort of issue about whether children should be allowed to use the bathroom of their choice, these decisions should be taken at a state level rather than the federal government here in the US.
Yeah, Giles, it seems like that's the big question all the time with both Democrats and Republican states' rights versus how much the federal government should interfere. Now, is there actually a genuine concern for those who oppose this directive? What is the reaction by some of those transgenders who do they feel like this is going to limit their rights? And clearly seeing what Trump has done in the last month or so since he's taken office, revoking everything and any directive that Obama has done. Is this more to really separate federal and states' rights, or is this just basically countering everything Obama has done? What are you picking up there?
Well, certainly the direct impact of pulling back on these guidelines will mean that certainly children who identify as transgender, they could be going into schools across the United States today, not knowing whether they'll be able to use the bathroom of their choice. I think that the key point to point out legally here is that these were always guidelines issued by the Department for Education and the federal government. They weren't necessarily laws. And many states here in the US actually have laws in place already that protect transgender rights and rights of these sorts of kind. So in some states, on a practical level, this won't really affect how these children, whether they can use the bathroom of their choice or not. But certainly in terms of symbolism, LGBT community and the LGBT sort of activists, they'll be saying that this decision is going to be hitting their rights very hard indeed.
All right, Giles, thank you so much for that perspective. Let's now go straight to Lena Montoya. She is joining us from Colombia. Lena, you're a journalist. You are also an activist. Talk to us a little bit about what Trump is doing. Yet another controversial move by some who say that, this is just part of his plan to revoke anything and everything that Obama did. Or perhaps is this truly going to protect in some way, shape or form transgenders in the United States? What are your thoughts about this?
Hello, thank you for having me. It's an honor. And I think that, yes, Trump is trying to revoke everything that Obama did, not only about transgender community or LGBT rights, even with the Latino community. I am Latina. We are having some troubles with Donald Trump policies. But in this particular case, it's to move not forward, to go back a lot of years, and there's a lot of problems to the kids, transgender kids, because this policy is putting these kids in danger against bully and other conducts that can put these kids and teenagers on risk. So Donald Trump has to think twice before making these kind of decisions, because it's not only to let every state decide, it's talking about all the American kids and teenagers are put in danger, are exposing these communities to be bullied, to be killed, in a big risk. So it's not good.
All right, Lena, 1 second. We're going to come back to you in just a minute. But first, let's get some perspective on what Trump's directive has now qualified with this latest order. Let's take a look at what he had to say. Quote, "This withdrawal of these guidance documents does not leave students without protections from discrimination, bullying, or harassment. All schools must ensure that all students, including LGBT students, are able to learn and thrive in a safe environment," end quote. So a very interesting directive that Trump is now addressing, really putting the focus on schools. So this whole debate about how states should determine that, schools should govern that. Lena, clearly this is opening up the whole question of bullying and harassment, as we just talked about, for transgender students. I mean, what is the road ahead? Do you think that there could be organizations that may sue the Trump administration or Donald Trump with regards to this? And why all of this is coming up right now? Clearly there were a lot of other issues on hand that he talked about, the wall, Obamacare, and then now this something that he didn't really mention, but many LGBT folks in the community are certainly going to be up in arms with this move. Your thoughts?
I think that this issue is on agenda right now because LGBT community is very powerful in America, and actually Obama last year made all these laws to protect them, to guarantee the freedom of expression, of the freedom of movement, everything. And Trump is like just making true one of his campaign trail promises. So he's going to start with everything that looks different, LGBT community, Latinos, and everything, immigrants, So Trump is trying to, I don't know if I should use this word, but he's trying to clean the country. So that's why this issue is on agenda right now. And it's a lot of fights. It's not only about talking about bathrooms. It's about harassment and bullying in schools, in offices, and everything that LGBT community has to deal every day.
Right, right, absolutely. Well, one of the other reasons this is now coming into the limelight is because of a pending case in the U.S. Supreme Court. It is Gigi versus the Gloucester County School Board. It's a case that pits a Virginia transgender boy. His name is Gavin Grimm. This against officials who want to denying him to use the boys' room at his high school. Let's listen in.
Frustrating that was even proposed, but this isn't going to stop us in our tracks. We're going to fight as hard as we always have, and it will not slow down at any point, and for any reason.
So the big question is, what happens to Gavin Grimm now? He has become a bit of a poster boy for transgender rights in the United States. Do we think he may be able to help reverse Trump's decision, Lena?
Yeah, maybe he's a representative figure in this to discuss this issue. In American society, they have to discuss this kind of moves from Trump's administration, and especially the Secretary DeVos. She is another interesting person with this kind of policies have to be discussed, because the world is opening to LGBT community, and opposite, America is closing to the rights. So it's important that in order to protect every child, not only transgender, have this kind of discussions about the law and to guarantee their rights. I understand that some people have fears about, for example, expose women with transgender boys in the bathrooms to prevent abuse or conducts like that. But the first thing here is to try to protect the kids against bullying and harassment, because every transgender kid who is exposed to this will be a big problem for the nation in the long term, I think.
Right, absolutely. Very interesting perspective there, Lena. Thank you so much. A quick updates to bring our viewers with perspective on this. All of these protests that were taking place in the United States in Washington, D.C. have now spilled onto social media. People are getting a glimpse of how people on Twitter are reacting. Let's take a look at some of those reactions coming in. Texas will sue to stop Obama's transgender directive to schools. Quite a bit of other reaction pouring in with regards to the chatter on social media. Let's now go back to Giles Gibson, who is in Washington, D.C. Giles, you know, you are there sort of front and center in the nation's capital. We've seen a lot that is happening. He's talking about bullying, talking about discrimination, talking about harassment. You know, this was a huge deal in the state of North Carolina as well. And at one point, some sort of relief for many people in that state with that bill. But unfortunately for those, it looks like things may take a different course now. I mean, how important is this, and what do we expect in the coming days? Do these protests really, will they have any kind of impact? What do we expect?
Well, this whole central debate really is about how the symbolism of this decision to pull back on these guidelines. the LGBT community and LGBT activists will say that pulling back these guidelines is going to directly impact LGBT children in schools across the US and their rights to express themselves and choose their own gender identity. But Republicans will say that this is not really about, it's not about LGBT rights at all. It's about whether these sorts of issues, civil rights issues, should be managed at the federal level or whether they should be managed at the state level. And Republicans, I think, defending this decision would say that there are already laws and protections in place in many states that will be protecting the rights of LGBT students in schools across the country. But of course, the protesters outside the White House last night and in many other cities across the US will strongly disagree with that viewpoint.
And Lena, let me go back to you now with regards to this. You talked about, Latinas and the Latin American community, and this sort of an issue transcends into not just certainly people within the United States, but also the image, the global image that Trump is sort of putting out with his perceptions. How is it being perceived outside of the United States? What are people, in Colombia and in South America, how are they reacting to this?
We have fear, to be honest. That's the perception, because Trump every day is surprising us with his decisions. First, the wall, now this transgender law. And here in Latin America, we are so conservative. But a lot of people of the LGBT community has feel free in the U.S. now. Look in this panorama, people is afraid, and we are thinking that we should reconsider to go back to states, to work, to invest, to do a lot of things, to study, even to express our opinions against Donald Trump and his administration. So it's a situation of confusion and fear. And we don't know how to expect next from Donald Trump.
All right, Lena Montayo joining us from Colombia, Giles Gibson sharing perspectives from Washington, D.C. Thank you both so much for that discussion. We're going to continue this conversation about transgenders, what issues they face not just in the United States, but in other parts of the world as well. We'll be right back here on Gravitas.